Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach, and today we have with us John Livesay, who is the pitch whisperer and the author of Better Selling Through Storytelling. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be with you.
Hey, so I interviewed you before when we were talking about the pitch whisperer and how you teach people how to pitch better for anything, whether it's presentation, sales, venture capital. It doesn't matter. Your pitch needs to be dialed in. And I think this concept takes it to the next level, which is integrating then storytelling into the process of selling your concept. And selling your concept could really be anything. It could be a product or service. It could be an idea. And so I really am looking forward to our interview. So give us a little bit of, catch us up on what made you think to write this book, Better Selling Through Storytelling.
Well, Mike, I noticed that whoever tells the best story gets the yes. And the old way of selling used to be just pushing out a bunch of information and hoping that something stuck or that people would remember some of the information. And I realized that that doesn't work anymore, or it's really small percentages, and that the new way of selling is to tell a story, because stories, instead of pushing out information, pull people in. You become magnetic, and great stories are memorable. So it's solving multiple problems of the old way of pushing and hoping something works, and then this allows you to pull people in and be memorable and have that emotional connection, because people buy emotionally and then back it up with logic. And if you just talk about information, you're just giving people logic.
Yeah, I agree with that 1,000%. And I think the question that pops into a lot of people's mind is what I was thinking when you were describing that. You can check the box and say, yep, nodding in agreement. I agree with that. That makes sense. Yeah. But where in the world do you start? Because am I correct in thinking that you have to have the nuts and bolts of your facts and figures of your product or service, and rather than just saying, here it is, now we need to pull them in and tell the story and all of that. But how do you make the transition between the true facts of what you really have and then drawing it out and bring it to life?
Well, the best way to do that, Mike, is most people jump right into the presentation and they're skipping the two most important steps. So here it is for everybody. First, you want to sell yourself. And you sell yourself by telling your story. What motivated you to, as you asked me, write this book, Better Selling Through Storytelling? Or what made you want to become an architect, or whatever it is you're doing? And then after you've sold yourself by telling your story of origin, you then sell the company, even if it's a one-person company. Sell the vision, the culture, the brand. What does it stand for? And what makes you different from all the other companies? And then you start getting into selling the product or service or whatever it is. And telling a story versus just a bunch of facts pulls people in, as I mentioned. And the way to do that, is usually you talk about someone else you've helped. Or when I've worked with architects or executive recruiters, they typically have a 1-hour presentation, and it's between them and 2 other firms. And whoever tells that best story during the hour is typically who they hire. And the old way of doing it is to just say, well, here's who we are. We've been in business this many years, and blah, 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 information. There's nothing compelling or memorable about it. And then they might talk about a case study. Well, here's some before and after pictures of, some other offices we've redesigned. But again, no story. And they're going into the facts and figures. This was this many square feet, et cetera, et cetera. However, if you say, we helped this airport go from number 24 to number 1 in 5 years, and the way we did it, and then you tell a story of the dramatic moment where you had to rip up all the floors in the middle of the night, and there's a problem that came up, but you had the resources to fix it so that the stores could all open on time and not lose any revenue. And now the airport got press in the New York Times, and all that stuff, that kind of a story is what brings the whole thing to life. And I've helped many companies from giving a keynote talk and a workshop on how to tell stories that get you new business.
Yeah, and I think when you can spice it up with some, intriguing curiosity, like that airport example, like you won't believe what happened in the middle of the night, and then it almost is like, even if their mind was wandering just a touch, they're like, ooh, what? And like, well, listen, it was a Tuesday night, and what happened was we got this phone call and whatever. So all of that makes sense to me. And I hope that this is an obvious question, but we don't mean that you're only telling the story, because when would the old school salespeople of the world be able to at least interject some of their facts and figures? So do you spice in some stories, or do you just totally avoid the facts and figures until someone goes, that is so awesome, now how do we accomplish that? And then you can get into it.
That's my recommendation. Pull them in with the story, have a conversation, even in an elevator pitch that you referred to earlier, Mike. The whole goal is to get somebody to say, that's interesting. Tell me how you do that.
Yeah.
And again, just remember when you get into the facts and figures, whether it's, how your fee works or whatever the numbers are, you're in the left side of the brain, analytical. And you want to stay in the right side of the brain where storytelling and emotion and likability and empathy come in. Because once people have hooked into, this person gets me, I want to work with them, now let's figure out how to make that happen. You get out of it all being about price, or whoever has the best price. That's the left side of the brain, analyzing everything, and that's facts and figures. Emotionally connecting with the story is, that's the journey I want to go on, and I'll figure out how to pay for it because I want that outcome. I want to look good to my boss. I want my airport to be ranked higher at the end of the renovation, whatever it is.
What is the quote? And I'm sure I'll butcher it, but the concept is that people don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care, that kind of a thing. And that really ties into what you're mentioning here, which is like, if your best friend in the world needed whatever you do for a product or a service, are they really going to sit down and grill you on all of the history of the company? No, they're going to go, John, I know that you sell this widget. I need one for my house. Bring it on over. And you barely talk about price. Well, you've got to use this story to draw them as close to that as possible, because you're not going to have the long enduring relationship, the time for the relationship building with that. But the stories will help to tie that in so that it doesn't, come off as stark as, here's the product, here's the price, here's the pen, let's sign it.
Exactly, because that's transactional, and people want to have relationships with people, and that's what stories do. And I really want to emphasize this point, Mike, is that you are not the hero of your story. The person you're helping is the hero. You're the Sherpa or Yoda in Star Wars. You're helping that person climb Mount Everest, and they can try to do it without you, but if you are the Sherpa, you help them get up much faster without frustration and avoid the pitfalls. That's the story, and you want to paint a picture so that people see themselves in the story of that person was just like me before you started working with them, and now after working with them, their life is so much better, or whatever that is. So that's what a story does. There's 4 key elements to it, and I'm happy to go into what those are with an example if you'd like. That
would be awesome.
Sure. So I'm going to tell a little story, and then we're going to break it down for everybody listening. One of my clients came to me and he said, I need some help with my confidence. I said, okay, let's write down 2 or 3 times when you knew you nailed something or where you really got your confidence from. I call it stacking your moments of certainty. It's a great exercise for everybody to do, especially before you go in to a job interview, pitching for funding, pitching to get a new client. And you put in those positive thoughts of, the other 2 times I've done this has worked out, and really reinforce your confidence. Well, Martin said, I love this exercise. I really remembered that, I was born in South America, but I grew up in the Netherlands. And when I turned 18, my parents took me back to South America and dropped me off naked in the Amazon jungle to survive for 2 weeks because of my culture. That's a rite of passage into manhood. I said, whoa, that gives me chills. Okay, let's work on that story. What lessons did you learn in the Amazon jungle? Well, I learned how to focus and pivot and persevere. I said, great. You're going to take those lessons from the Amazon jungle into the concrete jungle of being an entrepreneur. And when he had that pitch down, the investors funded his startup because they said, we're going to put our money on the guy that survived the Amazon jungle. He'll survive anything in the business world. So that's a short little story. Now, what makes that work? Well, The first part is exposition, the who, what, where. I paint the picture. And when I was working with Martin on practicing this, I said, Martin, if you don't say that it's a rite of passage in your culture into manhood, it sounds like child abuse.
Yeah.
So you need to paint that picture so we definitely know where we are. And the problem is he's naked in the jungle. And then the solution is he learns those life lessons of focus and persevering and pivoting. And then the resolution, Mike, is the big part most people don't have in their story. What was life like after Martin survived the jungle? Well, he got his startup funded because through telling that story, the investors said, that's our guy.
You know, that it made me think of something, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you can't just have these random stories. You can't just be thinking, cool, I read the book, I heard the podcast, I'm going to start telling stories and have this convoluted list of stories about this client, that client, and the other. Shouldn't someone in sales know the buyer's journey enough to know that the 3 to 4 main key things, objectives or objectives that they need to overcome are X, Y, and Z. So here's my little story / case study / whatever you want to think of it as, but I'm going to explain this in story format so that it pulls them through. Rather than, okay, everything that I talk about has to be in story format. There has to be a purpose behind it, right? I know that's what you're saying.
Correct. Yes. All stories, and they should have a structure behind it. Make sure you've got all 4 elements of what you're bringing that case study to life. Are we telling them how long ago this was? Are we telling them, you know, what city it took place in? Are we painting the picture? Are we describing the problem? Enough, because here's another takeaway, Mike. The better you describe a problem of someone you've helped, the more that person listening to that story thinks you have the solution.
Yeah.
So you describe that problem so well in the story that the person sees himself in the story, then you describe the solution and then make sure that story has a resolution. And then your closing question doesn't become, do you want to buy? Do you want to buy? It becomes, does that sound like the kind of journey you'd like to go on?
Yeah.
Yes.
That sure is an easier transition than here's the pen and just sit there in silence.
Yes, exactly. Well, we can talk about silence a little bit if you'd like. That's also in Better Selling Through Storytelling, is the power of silence. Again, the old way of selling, as you sort of alluded to, was, let's say you're selling a house. You know, you say, do you want to buy the house? And you have all this negative self-talk in your head going, oh, I really need this commission. If I have to show this person another house, I'm going to lose my mind. And so you interrupt the silence and you say, hey, what if we throw the refrigerator in? Would you buy it then? And you've interrupted the person's ability to say yes or no.
Yeah.
So the old way of doing it was whoever says something after asking a closing question loses. It's the game of who can keep the silence going the longest. And it's just negative energy, and people feel the stress. I tell my clients, after you ask a closing question, do you want to hire me? Do you want to buy the house? Whatever it is. Then just say to yourself 3 times, I am patient and calm. And it gives you an extra 5 or 10 seconds of silence because you're comfortable with the silence, giving that person the chance to say yes or no. I've had real estate agents go 20% increase in their closings for listings and selling houses by that one secret. Because when you become comfortable with the silence in your head, then, Mike, you become comfortable with the silence in the room.
And if you don't do that, then you're doing the old cliche talking yourself out of a sale, because sometimes people, you can literally, I've witnessed this myself, you see their eyes go up and to the left and they're thinking, and you literally need to stop talking then because they're trying to process something and think for a moment. And if you keep going, well, John, the reason that this is such a good deal is because we've been, they're just like, just stop. Because in Donald Miller's great book, Building a Story Brand, one of the key phrases that jumps out to me, and that is, when you confuse, you lose. And if you could be telling a great story, but if you don't pause and let that silence kind of simmer, then you are going to confuse them. So you could be trying to do the right thing, but maybe, be a little bit too pushy.
Exactly. Confident people are comfortable with silence. They don't need to fill every second. And that's the aha moment for most people. They go, ah. And here's another tip. So not only do you need to be comfortable with silence after you ask somebody if they want to buy, but after they say yes, don't keep selling. I've seen people do that. Well, there's 3 other things I haven't told you about how great this widget is.
Yeah.
No. Once they said yes, that's it. Don't keep talking about other things you need to tell them about.
And then tell them the 3 extra things after you've gotten the sale, the transaction, and use that as a value-add bonus. Like, oh, by the way, thanks for your business. One thing you're going to love is the fact that, and they're like, that, and then guess what that does? That cuts down on the cognitive dissonance, buyer's remorse, where they would go, wow. So, of course, we're getting off track here, but one thing that I really think that is an important piece is I know that you teach about or speak about being an artist to sell the product that could actually save lives. What's the significance of not only that statement, but the mindset behind that statement?
Well, it goes into what is your purpose. So I was hired by a division of Honeywell, and they sell equipment that keeps the operating rooms and hospitals clean so the people don't get infected when they're being operated on. And when I was giving a keynote to their sales team, I said, if you just get into the technology of how that all works and don't tap into the bigger picture of what you're doing is literally saving lives, then you've really missed the emotional connection and the value that you're bringing to what you're selling. And when that clicked for them, it was a mindset awareness. Then they started having different conversations, telling different stories, and getting more sales, because even the people buying the equipment at the hospital said, you're right. That's our purpose. That's our mission. You've tapped into that. You get us. We're not just here as another hospital. We really care about our patients. And we see now that this is another way to help our doctors have better outcomes and literally save more lives, because people can die from infections separate from the surgery. We need this. And it's an emotional decision that's then backed up with, okay, now tell me how it works. Yeah,
that's nice. So what would you say, let's wrap up here with one kind of a take action thought. If someone is hearing this and they're thinking, I need to start, you can't be perfect. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with that first step. So what would you say the first thing that someone would need to do to increase their sales, to start the process of implementing storytelling into their sales process?
Well, the first thing to do is to let go of being a perfectionist. And I say, and think of yourself as a progressionist. Celebrate your progress. And don't worry about, you're going to try a new skill and start telling stories. They're not going to be perfect. So use the structure I gave you of the 4 parts of a good story, and then start selling yourself first with a story. Just work on that story, and then go to the story of the company, and then the case study. So start with, what's my own personal story that's going to make somebody resonate with me of why I'm doing this and why I care about this.
Yeah.
And then you'll start to connect with them and go from there.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it really just lays that foundation, that origin story, what drives you, what's passionate. And this is something really interesting. I'm sure you watch the show with Marcus Lemonis called The Prophet, and I was watching one of the shows this week, and they were doing one of the recaps, and it was the episode about the bagel company, and this one guy and his wife, they mentioned just kind of almost in passing in the original episode that they lost 2 children years ago to a specific disease. And in this recap show, they were like, we got so much influx of people going, stay strong. That was so encouraging. And literally, I think he said that night, $5,000 of donations came into that specific, disease foundation. And they weren't even pitching that. They weren't even talking about it. But that became just something that really piqued the interest of people watching. And then that draws them in. So I think that becomes an element of that origin story where you just never know what you're going to say that might make someone just really attract to you. And you're like, oh, I was just kind of telling my story. And now they really start to be really synergistic to what you have to say moving forward.
Yes, that's the emotional connection. So even if you're raising money for a charity, don't talk about statistics. Talk about one story of one person you've helped.
That's perfect. Well, John, I know your brand new book is out in Kindle and due to be out in paperback, and maybe by the time people are listening to this, it's already out. But what's the very best time that someone, or way that someone can reach out and connect with you, learn more about your work, and pick up a copy of your brand new book?
Well, I have a gift for your listeners. If they text the word pitch, PITCH, to 66866, I'll send them a free sneak peek of my book, Mike. So that's the easy way to see if you want to buy it or not, or listen to it on Audible. Again, it's the word pitch with a P, and it's 66866, and I will email you a free sneak peek of the book. And, of course, if you know you want it, just go to Amazon or whatever your favorite way is to buy a book.
Perfect. Well, John, thank you so much for your time today. It was wonderful reconnecting with you and talking about storytelling.
Thanks, Mike.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.